Okay, let's go ahead and get started, folks. I'm always the sooner you get started, the sooner we're done kind of outlook here. It's nice to see everybody. I had not met Wade before. If you don't get a chance, make sure you say hi, introduce yourself, and just a couple of just a couple of Northwest folks that I don't know here, but I need some help on the memory, so we've probably met before. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm in the Garden City office, the Southwest Center. So what I wanted to talk about today are some new crop insurance products, relatively new crop insurance products that you may encounter. One is going to be the pasture, rangeland, and forage coverage. Another one is the annual forage coverage. They're both based on rainfall indices. Have you guys run into that before? PRF or the annual forage? The other one that's new this year is it's called margin protection. This is the first year that it's in Kansas, so it's even newer still. Well, I'm not sure it's going to catch on, but we'll at least try to give you the highlights on that one, so it's not completely new. I wanted to mention start with the PRF. That's pasture, rangeland, and forage. It's sold by all your regular crop insurance agents. It's just another RMA product out there. It's been around as a pilot program actually for several years, and it's intended to cover perennial forage ground. So that can be your permanent pasture, or it could be your hay crops, your alfalfa, your grass meadows that you cut for hay. So that's what it's intended for. The reason they're doing it is we've got a lot of acres in those categories. In Kansas, we've got over 15 million acres of permanent pasture, over 2 million acres of hay ground. Added all up, it's about 18 million acres altogether. And when you compare that 18 million acres of forage land to our 4 major crops, it's almost as big. You've got about 90% of those crop acres insured, but less than 5 acres of our grassland and hay crops insured. So there may be a niche for this product to grow. We'll see if it catches on. Mention that it's sold by your same crop insurance agents. The government pays over half the premium. It's going to use $1 coverage per acre. The idea is you want to come up with a dollar amount that you can use to buy replacement feed. That's what RMA had in mind when they were designing the product. Thing that's probably most interesting about it is it's area-based. You're not insuring your own individual farm, or, well, you're not using your own farm results, put it that way. It's going to be based on rainfall results for a grid area. We'll talk about how that works. Other thing to remember is it's only insuring one thing: low rainfall. You know, there's all these other things that can affect your forage production, of course, but they're not covered under the plan. You guarantee a % of your normal rainfall. That's your coverage. You can guarantee as high as 90% of your average rainfall, and if the rainfall is below that, the actual, then you get paid on the difference. We'll walk through all those details, how it works. You've heard it called a rainfall index product, and when we say rainfall index, all we're doing is expressing the rainfall amount as a % of normal. So 100% of normal rainfall, the index is 100. Here we've got an example. Say our 2-month time period, our average rainfall is 6 inches, and our actual is 4.5. What's the index? you got 75% of normal rainfall, right? So your index is 75. That's all the index is. We're just expressing our rainfall as a percent of the long-term average, okay? Like I said, if your actual rainfall falls below the guarantee that you picked, then you get paid. All right, that's the gist of it. Question always comes up, why are we insuring rainfall? Well, we're insuring rainfall because we don't usually measure our forage output, at least on the pasture side of things. There's not many guys who know what our pasture yield is, and so if we're not measuring it, we're not going to base the insurance on that. So what RMA came up with instead was, we've got to find something else that we do measure, that's going to be a good reflection of what our pastures and forages are doing, okay? So they came up with rainfall. Hopefully that's a meaningful measure, and it's also something that we do measure and we can keep track of for the insurance, okay? Now, next question is, whose rainfall are they using? And it's not yours. It's not the producers. They're using rainfall measured at the official government weather stations. RMA says there's thousands of the weather stations that go into the NOAA system, their climate prediction center. And the way it works, they'll pick the 4 closest reporting stations to your grid area and then come up with a weighted average rainfall for that grid. Then everybody in the grid is assumed to get that same rainfall. We're not relying on just one station, because it can be hit or miss. Their idea is we'll use the 4, and that's going to maybe give us a better result. That comes up at every meeting I do this, and RMA is kind of coy about that. Right. And we're also going to look at something like from the west to east effect. If my reporting stations are west of me, well, they may have missed the rain that I got. That's the tendency in Kansas, at least. So, but they don't have an official map. And I've asked them, and at these meetings, people ask me, and I don't have a map. Yeah. We're going to have, we're working on a project now that I'll show you something at the end about the map of stations. But I don't know if RMA is worried that they'll get sabotaged. Somebody will put a bucket over it, so they'll collect the insurance. I mean, it could happen, if there's thousands of dollars riding on the outcome. But that's all I can say, at this point. You can make some pretty big money. We'll show some numbers here in a minute. So here's what the grids look like. The grids here are 1/4 degree longitude by 1/4 degree latitude. Now for us, that's about 17 miles north to south, 13, 14 miles east to west. Here's the grid for Garden City. We'll zoom in on that in a minute. If your land happens to straddle the grid line, you can put it all in one or all in the other, or split it out. They let you do that. But everybody in the grid, everybody in this grid is assumed to get the same rain under this plan, okay? It could. Yeah. Here's this idea about the 4 closest reporting stations. They picked the stations closest to the center point of the grid, And then in the weighted average, the distance is the weight. So closer stations get a bigger weight, okay? And I think the idea of using 4 is, you know, it's not quite a hit or miss as just using one station might be. So there's a smoothing effect that goes on in that too. These are important websites. You need to, they're in your notes, so you might want to go home and check these. But the first one is the RMA website, has all the background information. I'll show you that in a minute. Then the other page is the grid locator and decision tool. So we're going to spend some time on the decision tool. We'll walk through. I'll show you some screenshots. I think that's the one that you, and if you want to work with producers, that's the one to get familiar with. Here, oh, did I skip? Okay, I left out the RMA page. It has links to the policy language. There's a fact sheet, tells about the weather stations, how they do the weighting, all kinds of background information on that. Here's the grid locator and decision support tool. You type in your location and zoom in, you can see there's Garden City. One thing you have to remember, everything in PRF goes off a grid number. Okay, so they've got weather history for this grid going back to 1948, and all the premiums, all the coverage, everything is geared around that grid and its history. Okay, so remember your grid number. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay, other thing we're going to do then is look at this decision support tool. You see the tabs here. You can look up your historical indices. So for this grid, you can go back to 1948, see what it was for every month. And then this one lets you pick a certain coverage and then see how your indemnities would have looked like every month back to 1948, okay? So those are all included, but this decision support tool is where we're going to focus here. Yeah, there's my grid thing. Hard to see this, but this is what the decision tool is. There's a location section. There's a protection information, they call it. You pick your coverage. This is the dollars coverage in your policy. And then this they call the protection table. They figure your premium. This last thing here is you can pick a particular year and see how the coverage you selected would have performed in that year. It'll bring up the index values for the year that you picked, and it'll show you how much the coverage would have paid out. Okay, we're going to walk through that in painful detail just because I want you to get familiar with it. Okay, here you've got the grazing or haying choice. On your haying, you can be irrigated or not, organic or not. Here's where you pick the coverage level. Remember, that was 70 to 90. This productivity factor lets you scale your dollars of coverage up or down. It'll give you a base amount for the county, and if you want more, you use that productivity factor to raise your dollars of coverage. Or you can use it to lower it. Okay, that's what the productivity factor is. This other stuff, it's straightforward. Here's the policy information. RMA will give you a dollar amount per acre that they consider to be average forage value production for your county. Okay, that's the county base value. RMA sets that. And then here, the dollar amount of protection, that's where you get to use that productivity factor to raise or lower your dollars of coverage. All right? What we're using an example of 1,000 acres. So $49 of an acre of coverage that we're buying gives us on 1,000 acres, $49,000 of coverage. The premium for the 90% coverage is subsidized 51%. The most we can put in any one period, our time period, our coverage is 60%. We'll look at that more on this next slide. Here's the production table, the first part of it. Here's where you pick the time periods that you want to insure. Okay, they call them index intervals. And you have to pick at least 2 periods and then decide how you want to allocate your dollars of coverage across the year. So I picked Really simple example, the simplest one, I put 60% in May, June, 40% in July, August. We'll spend a little more time in a moment talking about those allocations, but that's a simple example that we'll start with. The rest of this part of the table shows how the premiums are calculated. So we start with that $49,000 of coverage. We put 60% in May, June, 40% in July, August. This next section is the premium calculation. This column shows the premium rates. So think of that as a percent. So it's going to cost us 19% of this amount to insure May, June. Okay? Which months are the most expensive to insure? It's the cold months, isn't it? The summer months tend to be much cheaper. Here in this particular grid, about half as much. That's because in percentage terms, variability is less in the summer than it is in the winter. Well, that's a diversion. We'll get into that. But anyway, we multiply our dollars of coverage times the rate, the percent. That's the total premium. Subtract out the subsidy, and that's what we get for the producer's share. Okay, so we're insuring 1,000 acres, and we do the same calculation for July, August. And what's our total premium per acre to do this? About $434 an acre. That's what it costs us to insure these two time periods. Okay, questions on how we got that? Reason I'm going through this is I don't want this to look like a black box. You'll understand where the numbers are coming from. Okay? All right. So $49,000 policy on 1,000 acres costs us about $434 an acre. Here's the part of the table where we can look at how would this coverage that I picked, how would it have performed in a bad year? Or any particular year that I'm interested in. I picked 2012. That was our bad year. The May-June index was 29. Did we have a loss? We got 29% of normal rainfall, and we're guaranteed 90%. So yeah, we had a loss. How big of a loss? Well, we do this payment factor calculation. It's just a percentage loss. That's the guarantee minus the actual as a percent of the guarantee. So we had about a 68% loss in that time period. Next step, how much is the payment going to be? Multiply our payment factor times our dollars of protection. So that's about 68% times the $29,000 gives us a $19,900. That's where that number comes from. Okay? Any questions? Do the same thing for our July, August time period. Notice the index was a little higher there. We end up with about a $26,000 indemnity, almost $26 an acre for 2012. If we had had this coverage in place and picked those time periods. Questions? How we got that? Is that making sense? I hope. Okay. So that's how you use the tool. Mentioned we can also insure haylands. The main thing that's different there is you have a much higher dollar value per acre. Production value is much higher. There's an irrigated and non-irrigated option on that. We're going to rush through that. PRF, I offer 3 questions to consider as you look at this. First question is, do the PRF indices do a good job predicting drought in my location? You know, because we've got these weather stations in other places. Second question is, which set of intervals should I choose and how should I allocate my coverage among them. Okay. Last question would be, is PRF going to, in a bad year, is PRF going to pay me enough money to buy the feed that I need so I don't have to sell all my cows? Okay, so we can look at those questions. This is not a very satisfactory, well, it's not a very satisfactory slide, but this is also not a very satisfactory way of trying to answer the first question. What this shows is the historical indices for my grid, for the Garden City grid. And here we can go back and pick one year, say the 2012 year, and yeah, that was a bad year. The index values seem to reflect that. 2011 the same way. So the best we can do at this point is to maybe look at this table and say, the bad years that I had, do the indices reflect that for my grid? Okay. That's what RMA offers. We're looking at building something that gives us more information, but that's where we're at right now. On the question of interval allocation, obvious first question, I think, is when does the pasture need the rain? We ought to be insuring those months if we're looking at a risk management tool, right? So you may have some small difference between warm season and cool season, but spring and early summer months are, all the range scientists say, are most important months. Here's a strategy, this second bullet, this strategy that some crop insurance agents are using to sell this, and it's, you should put a little coverage through the whole year. The idea being, we're going to minimize the chance that you'll actually owe us any premium at the end of the year. The more periods you pick, the more chances you have of collecting. So spread it out that way, and chances are you won't owe us a premium by the end of the year. That's the way it's kind of being sold by some of the agents I've met. Other factor to look at, premium costs. Remember when we looked at the premiums, which months were the cheapest to insure? I copied all the rates for the different coverage levels for the Garden City grid. You can see them all here. It's, you know, the cold months are basically double what some of the warmer months are. And as you go to lower coverage levels too, you can see how much they decline. So have some real choices on the price side for what they want to spend on that. Here's the probabilities. Talked about how often things pay. The reason January, February is so expensive, if you pick this month going back to 1948, you'd be getting paid over half the time. That's the Garden City grid, looking at the index values all the way back to 1948. You would have gotten paid over half the time, 56% of the time, if you had insured that month. Well, that's why the premium is twice as high, too, right? Because you're getting payouts so much more often. So it goes, for this grid, it goes all the way down to about 1 year and 4. So that's what the probabilities come out for this particular grid. I'm running way over on time, aren't I? Okay. Well, we can skip through this stuff pretty fast here. This last question, the dollars for feed, I just show a little quickie spreadsheet. I take the dollar amount that I got from the decision tool and calculate how much feed could I buy and how much feed would my cattle be eating. So how many days am I, how many days of feed am I buying? So you can, if you decide, oh, I don't need to pay for this much coverage, you could lower your productivity factor, or you could go to a lower guarantee level, something like that. Yeah, I need to speed up. So most of our locations in the drought years, I haven't found a grid yet where 2012 doesn't pay. But in years where the rainfall is more spotty, you're going to have a hit or miss. Like Glenn was saying, it depends where your weather stations are. You can have a year where you get rain, but the stations don't, so you don't get paid. Or, exactly, whether it rains at your place or not. Over a long period of time, say if you look at the grids for at least 20 years or so, you're going to be getting about $1.50 to $2 back for every dollar that you're paying in premium. And that's a reflection of the premium subsidy. Okay? You can have this hit or miss in any particular year, right? So here's something I should have said about up front. November 15th is the sales deadline. I don't know, it may be too late to think about a meeting for this fall, but if you wanted to try to work it in, we could give it a good try. But just wanted to let you know about that. We'll speed up here. Rainfall coverage. This is the annual forage product. You can see where it's available. Annual forage is for these crops that are planted each year that get turned into livestock feed. That can be something you chop for silage, it could be something you graze off, something you make for hay. Okay? You can see the other stuff here. Main thing is it uses all the same grids and periods and all that machinery we just looked at for PRF. It all uses the same stuff. So you got an idea already pretty much how it's going to work. One thing that's a little bit different, the acre values are going to be much higher. It has a CAT coverage level where you don't actually pay a premium, it's just a flat fee, but you have to have a pretty significant loss. And it's not going to pay you that much when it kicks in, okay? That's a CAT coverage option that's available for it. Other thing that's different is it has 4 growing seasons, okay? It's got the 4 growing seasons according to when you plant, and then the rainfall months are what you see in the table there. So maximum allocation to any interval is going to be 40%. So you'll end up actually covering most of the growing season, right? So this is where you can find more information on annual forage. Let's charge ahead into the margin protection. That's a new pilot program this year. It was just available in limited areas. It's just come to Kansas for corn and soybeans. Excuse me. The thing that's interesting about it, it's based on county yields. It's not based on your own farm yields, it's based on county yields. Most of western Kansas has coverage for corn. Not so much western Kansas for soybeans. So when we're talking about margin protection, what do we even mean by margin? Margin is just the difference between revenue minus your input costs, okay? That's what we say mean by margin. So a loss, yeah? Oh, no, I have a question, sorry. So your margin could have a loss on the crop price, crop yield, or your input costs going up. Any of those could trigger a loss. So you're actually covering against the cost of rising input costs. And these are the inputs that are covered. That last one is that other cost. That's a big lump sum number, and it's the same for everybody in every county. The time period is really different. You actually had to sign up in the fall before you plant for corn and soybeans because they're looking at covering the price of increased input costs from there till springtime. Okay, that's a little bit different. Now your harvest price for the crops and the interest is in the fall like it usually is, but then you don't get a payout until you know what the county yields are announced all the way the following spring. Okay, so that's really drug out. Guarantee levels, you can get a very low deductible. You can have a protection factor on this one, scale your dollars of coverage up or down by 20%. It also has a harvest price option. We talked about it doesn't use your own yield, it uses the county yield, and the inputs amounts are not the inputs that you use, it's input amounts determined by formulas based on the county yield. That's what this next table shows. I took the formulas and I assumed non-irrigated corn and 140 bushel yield. Formulas give me this set of input quantities. Okay, then they have futures price contracts that give you these prices, and then the cost result just falls out. Okay, so you get a total cost per acre. Show similar set of calculations for a county yield of 40 bushels for soybeans. Notice that they don't include nitrogen, the urea fertilizer. Now I'll just try to wrap up showing some charts here. This is just a picture. Suppose we've got our example of a county yield 140 bushels, projected price is 360, and our expected cost is 278. So price times yield, that's the green bar. That's our expected revenue. We just looked at the table with our price calculation, and the difference is the expected margin. Okay? Now we take our deductible out of that, and this is 95% coverage. We take the deductible out of the expected margin, and we get the trigger margin. If your harvest margin falls below the trigger margin, you trigger a payment. Okay? So here's our harvest revenue. We've got a final yield that was lower, final price that was higher, cost went up a little bit. We ended up with a harvest margin of 163. So that harvest margin is smaller than the trigger margin by $38. See the difference? So we take that $38, we had a protection factor there of 1.2, so we scale that up to get our final indemnity amount, okay? Whirl of numbers just swirling at you, I know. Here's the same thing with the harvest price option. Harvest price option just lets you recalculate your trigger margin if the harvest price is higher, all right? So remember, our price went up to 370, so our trigger margin's a little bit higher. Same harvest calculations, our margin loss is a little bit bigger, and our indemnity is a little bigger, okay? Well, that's fast. Here's what I think is I think is going to be the final problem with the margin protection. You see what the cost is going to be. When you get into these very low deductibles, it's going to get expensive. So I worked through this example. There's a website where you can go and it'll do all the calculations for you. You pick your crop and county, and it spits out all these numbers. The other thing that I'm showing here is what's called a premium credit. Now, the idea is that some of this county loss, and if you have your own crop insurance, your individual coverage, there's some overlap between the two, so you get a premium credit. You get a little bit of money back on your premium. Now, in this case, this table shows how much that credit is. So I show an example. I have 75% revenue coverage on my own farm. That's about $15.83 an acre. Suppose I also pick 85% margin protection, $18 an acre. My credit's going to be $1.52 an acre. So we end up with a total cost of about $32. Well, if I'm going to spend over $30 an acre on my coverage, I might just go this way. Put all the coverage on my own farm. And, you know, why am I waiting till April or May or later, you know, before I see whether I have a loss, and take a chance that the county doesn't move in a way that benefits me? Okay. That's kind of where I come out on that. So just kind of a summary list of ideas here. That's where you can find more information on the margin protection. And questions? That was fast. Hope the caffeine or the sugar kept you going. Yeah, Mark. The decision to sorry, it's in the slide. It's marginprotection.com. This one right here, marginprotection.com. I think it's in the slide. Okay. Questions on that? I know it was fast, but Art's here